Hey you. Do you like the Tales from the Crypt series? Do you like spooky things in general? Then check out the Good Evening Kitties podcast. That's Good Evening Kitties podcast. GOODEVENING KIDDIES podcast. Each week, I'll review a new episode from the TV series The Tales from the Crypt. Find me on Podbay, Podbean, or iTunes. That's the Good Evening Kitties podcast. Check it out today.
Until today, Thomas King was a convicted felon, wanted for rape, arson, and murder. Here he is, just steps away from two of Detroit's finest. These two officers are completely unaware of the monster in their midst. And then, in 60 seconds, I repeat, just 60 seconds, Detective Murphy brings him down.
The right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you.
This, my friends, is the future of American justice. How many, like Thomas King, will pay for their crimes now that Robocop is here?
This is the emergency podcast system. This is not a test. Movies are bombing all over the country. They are posing as movies you already know. They may already be in your theaters, your neighbor's home, or even your own. Do not panic. Specialists have been dispatched. They will help you identify these pretenders and defend you against this invasion of the remake. Please stand by for further instructions.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Welcome to the Invasion of the Remake podcast. I'm your host, Jason Bishop, and of course with me today is Sam Stepanenko.
Hello, Jason will be host for one more week.
Bastard. hey, that laughter. That's Trish Coughlin.
Yes, I'm back.
You know how she got back? Is because my special guest, Carlos, who was our law enforcement specialist for this episode, I called him to go get her because she's been MIA for like 4 weeks.
Hello, nice to be here, folks.
Thanks for joining us for Robocop versus Robocop. Mm-hmm. This is one of the big ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's near and dear to my heart, so I'm very enthusiastic to be here. And while I'm just speaking as a private guy and not on behalf of my organization at all, I'm happy to lend any color to the discussion that I can from a semi-informed platform, not purporting to be a subject matter expert or anything like that.
Nice disclaimer like that. That was a good disclaimer.
I think I've covered
That's good.
everything.
So when I ask how often do things disappear from lockup?
That would be a no comment.
That'd be no comment.
Okay.
Well, no,
In terms of the movie, he can answer.
yeah,
Yes, in terms of the movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, interestingly enough, the lockup used to be in the building I work in.
Oh,
What?
wow.
Yeah, there is a big lockup warehouse right in the building I work in.
Cool, a crossover.
They moved it about a year ago.
Yeah. That was,
Oh, the Calgary lockup, not like the one in the movie lockup.
No. But the evidence lockup. Every once in a while, you could tell when we got a big bust for pot because the whole building would reek of pot.
Oh, man.
I think that's one of the reasons they moved it. Because we're getting
everybody else in the building was getting high.
getting contact. Yeah, you walk down the back hallway. It's like, oh wow, I feel real good.
Or people were getting pulled over on the way home. They're like, no, I just work in the building.
They're like, everybody here loves their job. They're so mellow.
Maybe that's why I've been so stressed lately because they got rid of it.
Oh, there we go.
you have to ask
what
for
happened.
relocation.
Yep.
Yeah, now it's just a big empty room. I don't know what they're using it for, but
I don't know what's
Fight
going on
Club?
there.
yeah, maybe. Well, you never know. We have EMS. We have a police office there. We have 911 in there. We have a ton of offices in there. So you never know. You might be having a little bit of
That's where they hold the
interdepartmental combat.
That's where they hold all the orgies.
That's a no comment.
That's no comment.
So, no comment usually means yes, right?
No. Or it might be like he's trying to put you off the path. What actually is happening is they're like, I don't know, playing like Dungeons and Dragons in there. It's not really that exciting.
Knowing Carlos, that's probably true.
It's Twister and Board Game Room. That's what they're doing.
They're rewatching Batman.
You never
for
know.
the 50th
Occasionally, I
time.
do see table set up in there, so yeah, I could buy that.
You know what? I'd be down with Board
How
Game
much
Fight
would you
Club.
buy that for?
I'd buy that for $1.
Oh, no. And back to Robocop.
See, I saw an opportunity to pull this back, and I did.
You did it. It's good.
Okay, we are talking about RoboCop 1987, directed by Paul Verhoeven. And one of his earliest American films, this was shortly after Flesh and Blood, which we might cover on the show, because I really like Flesh and Blood, or I remember liking Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, I was about to say I remember liking it, but I also remember it wasn't really a very good film.
But it's a testament to how much he likes to see the violence and the consequence of violence on film.
That's true, yes.
Yeah.
We've seen that throughout his career on things like Starship Troopers and Hollow Man
And the interstitials with the satirical commercials, very much Verhoeven.
Very much, because he does
that's
it in
a signature piece.
Yeah, he does that in this Starship Troopers, one we've already covered, Total Recall.
Yep.
This script was originally written by Ed Neumeier, who wrote Starship Troopers as well, and Mike Miner, who wrote huge hits like Lawnmower Man 2 and Anacondas.
So another sequel.
It's amazing that this movie did anything at all, knowing that. The budget for this was $13 million. It grossed in the U.S. It didn't find a worldwide gross, but in the U.S. at 1987, $53.4 million. Oh, I forgot to write down the Rotten Tomatoes stuff. Oh, well. Oh. But IMDb, 7.5 out of 10, so well regarded.
I remember it being big.
It's like 78 something on Rotten Tomatoes, 78 or 83.
Yeah,
Nice.
Memory serves.
There you go.
Certified fresh at any rate.
Yeah.
And of course, the
Absolutely.
remake reboot of RoboCop from 2014, directed by Jose Padilla.
Padilla?
I think
Padilla. It's probably
Padilla?
Padilla.
Okay, I'll go with that. Because it's not me if I don't mispronounce a name. Honestly, the only thing I could see him directing at this point, this was almost I think his first American film was, and then there's Elite Squad, which I'd never heard of.
Oh.
So
That sounds like a direct to VOD.
yeah, and they still gave this guy $100 million to play with.
Yeah, I think it was like a Brazilian production, his first movie, and that's what got him this job.
Yeah, like he might have been bigger outside of the U.S.
Oh, for sure.
Because they'll take people in like that.
Yeah, most of the resume I saw was foreign films. This movie didn't do too badly overall. I guess when $100 million in 2014, you pretty much have to triple your money after marketing and stuff these days. So it's not a success by any stretch of the imagination at $242.6 million worldwide.
Not a flop either,
Not a
but-
It's not a
flop.
flop. It's a moderate.
But not enough to get it the sequel that it deserves.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty decent follow-up, and I think the big problem with the remake is the PG rating. The PG-13 rating really holds that movie back.
Yeah, it's one of those where I'm usually not a big proponent of forcing an R or an X on anything, but in this case, having revisited the movie like a couple times recently, it's like, well, you might have been able to tell a better story if you weren't kind of handcuffed by
well,
I don't even know that the story itself was so bad. It's just that it felt dulled a little bit by the rating. Yeah, like a lot of the visual visceralness of the first movie is missing.
well, what the whole thing is when you're constrained by like a rating, and the entire point of the movie is the violence and the brutality. You're missing the whole point of the movie, and that's why it feels terrible. Like
Now,
it doesn't work.
The big problem with something like RoboCop is it appeals to kids. It did when I was a kid. Like in '87, I still wasn't old enough to go to an R rating by myself, and boy, did I beg my dad to do it. And we actually went, and they wouldn't let us in. And that was when I got a hint of, oh, this might not be what I think it is.
I think it's on VHS.
And it didn't fall into the PG category until the third movie, when they really softened it up, and the third movie just feels like a backdoor pilot to the eventual TV series. And I think it was all... was the third movie Canadian made as well? Because it certainly looked like it had very similar production values to the TV series.
Yeah, the third movie, I think, went PG just because of the pressure to have it fit into all the side things that they had done with that property. So while they're putting out a hard R Robocop 2, they're concurrently putting out toy lines and the first of two very antiseptic animated series. And so I think, and Robocop 2 more so fell into that conversation of what is Hollywood doing and how are they indoctrinating our kids into this violence. And it was hard to defend what they were doing in the cinema while at the same time the studio was selling children's products.
Children's. Yeah, you're selling toys and marketing this to kids while they can't actually see the material.
Yeah, and then I mean, and they lost Peter Weller for the third one as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
it's tough to replace that voice, and then there was that
and that presence. I mean, you can't deny the presence that Peter Weller had, given that all you could see was his mouth and nose. Right?
Yeah, and the bird-like movements that he would do, and up to that point, his only hit was The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai.
Love that movie.
Yeah.
And by all accounts, he was open to doing the movie, but because he had committed to doing Naked Lunch with Cronenberg or Fincher, I can't remember.
Cronenberg.
Yeah, because he had committed to doing that, he had to walk away from doing Robocop 3 just because of the filming schedules, and it wasn't as...
he made the right choice.
Yeah.
Naked Lunch is an amazing film to watch.
And given what Robocop 3 turned into... Yeah.
He made the right call.
Yep.
Yeah. But that was production really hampering a more R-rated script, because that was Frank Miller wrote... initially, it was one script that got split into two movies. The heavier R stuff kind of got put into Robocop 2, and there were still some elements left that they pulled into Robocop 3, but at that point they dropped like the really hard R.
Well, part of that was out of necessity, not so much the rating, but Frank Miller coming in, because that was the writer's strike. Cut Robocop 2's production off at the knees, but they wanted the movie when they wanted the movie, so they brought him in as a comic book writer, as opposed to part of the guild to write this script. And having just read the initial vision recently, I was just like, holy smokes, that they made an actual decent-ish movie out of Robocop 2 based on what he gave him.
I've never seen the original script, but it has been adapted into comic books a couple of times now.
Yeah, there's an omnibus that they did, and it's basically the entire story with a break in between the two, which is, I think, put forth as the end of Robocop 2, and then it segues into what becomes Robocop 3.
Right.
So Carlos isn't just our law enforcement specialist. He's also like a RoboCop super fan. He's even wearing the shirt.
Yeah.
It's usually me.
It's usually you,
Yeah, my journey with RoboCop is weird. Like, I vividly remember in elementary school, and my dad was not like Jay's dad. There's no way in a month of Sundays that he was going to be taking me to go see RoboCop.
In my dad's defense, I don't think he knew what he was taking us to.
But I mean, like any movie, right? Like, the pop culture stuff wasn't... a big go-to in our house for him, but elementary school, I remember there was a kid who had been put in the hallway sitting in his desk, and I go to the washroom, and he had a bunch of pictures from Starlog magazine that he had taped to the front of his desk in decoration, and they were of RoboCop, and it was, I remember the headline to this day, and I was only like grade 3 or 4 at the time, but it was Cop in a hot tin suit, and it was these pictures of Peter Weller from the end of RoboCop 1, where he's all trashed and you see his face without the helmet and stuff. And I was just captivated by this. And at the time, my best buddy from down the street, his dad used to, every weekend, rent 6 or 8 VHS tapes and do the tape-to-tape recording thing. And when I expressed my desire to see this, he's like, oh, well, I got this movie RoboCop for you, no problem. So he made me my own copy. And God, I watched that thing hundreds of times at a far too innocent age to be watching RoboCop, but RoboCop for me became what Star Wars is to most people, kind of 5 to 10 years plus or minus my age.
It's that magic age.
Yeah.
And I was a teenager when this came out. Like I was 17, so I saw it in the theater. I remember seeing it in the theater, and I remember the "I'll buy that for $1" becoming part of our lexicon for a long time, right? Because it was catchy, right?
I'd buy that for $1.
That one and "Get Out, Bitch."
Bitches leave.
Or bitches.
Bitches leave.
Bitches
Yeah, bitches leave. That's the one. Yeah,
Jesus. Thanks for doing your research, Sam.
I did, and my memory's not so good. We talked about that earlier this week. That my memory's not so good anymore. Yeah.
You only have room for Star Wars or RoboCop in your mind, and I'm the one guy that went RoboCop. So all's forgiven, Sam.
Yeah, no, the thing is, I'm not a specialist. I love it all, and sometimes I only can't remember certain bits. But I do remember those two phrases being part of our lexicon as a teenager.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's get all of our audience all caught up. You know you want to hear it. The vintage trailer to RoboCop. We'll be right back after that.
We get the best of both worlds. The fastest reflexes modern technology has to offer, onboard computer-assisted memory, and a lifetime of on-the-street law enforcement programming. It is my great pleasure to present to you Robocop. This guy is really good.
He's not a guy, he's a machine.
All Detroit has a cancer. Cancer is crime.
Let the woman go. You are under arrest.
You better back up, pal.
Your move, creep.
What are your prime directives?
You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney.
What is this shit?
Anything you say may be used against you.
He's a cyborg, you idiot. He recorded every word you said.
You're dead. We killed you.
His memory's admissible as evidence. You're gonna have to kill it.
Get out of the car, for God's sake!
Robocop, the future of law enforcement.
Okay, so I don't know why they were using the Terminator theme on that.
No idea. They have their own theme.
Similar, it's the same studio, I do believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so maybe they just didn't have, when they made the trailer, they didn't have the music in place yet for RoboCop. Because the RoboCop theme is really memorable.
Absolutely. The big orchestral sound from Basil I want to say Papadopoulos, but it's not. But it's actually not that far from it.
Look it up.
Yeah, he did an amazing job with that score, and it kind of serves that same function as the score to Back to the Future, where it's big and orchestral, and it's bigger than the actual movie is, but it elevates the entire thing.
Well, there's something about the music that I really liked, and it was something that the special features pointed out to me that subtly I didn't notice. But when you're dealing with the human aspects of Alex Murphy, played by Peter Weller, it's all orchestral. But when you get into the RoboCop stuff, it's all synth.
Yeah.
It's all synth music. And that's really interesting, and it works really well.
It does. Organic versus digital, right?
Yeah.
It's a great way of emphasizing that without pointing it out, right?
Yeah.
And so and it works really well that you don't notice it.
Yeah.
Right.
And the fact that they didn't go all synth, like if they had gone all synth, that movie would have been dated very quickly.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Whereas now it's one of the classics of that period, and obviously I'm a little biased towards it.
No, because having
No, it is a
rewatched it
classic.
recently multiple times myself, and not in the recent past as well, it still really is a very watchable film, even given its time frame.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's a miracle this thing even got made with a dumbass name like RoboCop. Like, really, it's dumb, but at the same time, it is so on point that you couldn't really come up with anything better. Like, if you want a descriptive title about your movie, it doesn't get better than that.
It doesn't get better than that.
Well,
and when they made movies in the 80s, they went with these types of titles.
Yeah,
absolutely. We had discussed before, but Verhoeven, when he was given the script, kind of looked at the title, said, "This is ridiculous," and tossed it aside. And while he was in this script meeting, his wife had actually picked it up and started reading it. And over the course of her reading it, she handed it back to him and said, there might be something here for us to work with, and the rest is history, so to speak. So
when they basically allowed him to do whatever the hell he wanted, he didn't have very much interference on this movie, and it's kind of rare. I don't think they had a lot of faith. Nobody wanted to do it up to that point. So when he's like wanted to show the consequence of violence within the body of the film, I don't know if they would have gotten away with it with any other director, or if they would have done it this way. And honestly, if they'd done it any differently, we might not have ever seen more than one.
No, that's true. That's very true. Right. And again, that speaks to Verhoeven's talent, and even at a young age state point in his career, how well he tells a story and how well he conveys it without hitting you in the face with it even, right? I mean, this is a violent graphic film, but the message he's conveying is not like, here it is. It's like, if you watch this movie, you're going to get it, right? If you actually watch it. Right?
Yeah. One, his purpose wasn't to glorify violence. His purpose was, as a person from outside the United States, to showcase kind of where American sentiment and the mindset was going and it was the movie, more than anything, is a social commentary.
Yep.
Yeah.
If you take the violence, and really one of the main themes throughout the entire movie is just how cheap human life is viewed by their society, right?
And also how it's violence in human life is profit.
Absolutely.
They'll use anything. Like when the cops decide to go on strike, the first meeting they're having, like, we can make a mint from people dying and all this horrible things happening. That's the first thought.
Yeah, and it's a theme in both movies, is how can we financially gain from doing this? They were privatizing the police department, selling it off to corporations to run. In this case, it was OCP or / Omnicorp in the remake.
No, and I mean, this was really right at the end of the 80s, where that greed and wealth was a very big thing, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we talk about American Psycho, which also comments on that particular era in time where it was about what you had, not who you were.
There's an interesting little piece that I caught with one of the most recent viewings of the movie, when Bob Morton is pitching the concept of Robocop to the old man from OCP. He very quickly touches on a redistribution of the police officers within Detroit, now that Omni Consumer Products controls the police department, and with that redeployment, the candidates that they felt were the best for the Robocop program were all put into the most violent, dangerous precinct or district in Detroit, in the hopes that one of them would be killed so that they could advance their product.
And then the other part too, like when they're pitching a bunch of stuff, they're like, oh yeah, all this stuff, we started going in, and they pitch it, they couch it in the weirdest way. They're like, oh yeah, no, we got into like prisons and all this other stuff. Like, isn't it great that we got into the nonprofit stuff? Aren't we doing good things?
In the remake, yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, the propaganda, the corporate propaganda that's happening in the remake really hammers that home with the Novak segments.
Yeah, which I thought was a nice nod to the original with the insertion of the TV bits.
Yeah, well, and it was a more modern take, instead of just your TV, how terrible television has gotten, and just dumbing down a nation. They kind of went a different way with those extreme right or left programs on news, quote unquote news sites.
It's media getting paid to put forward a particular
idea. I mean, it wouldn't be.
When I'm looking at Samuel L. Jackson, I'm like,
it's
so
Fox
he's paid
News
by Omnicorp.
Of RoboCop, you know?
Yeah, like
absolutely.
He works for Omnicorp. He doesn't work for the network.
Yeah, no, because he was a single-minded focus on that show, and that was made very, very clear.
Yeah, right. And every time there was some sort of moral justification for something that might go against their agenda, they would cut that person off or switch. Oh, we gotta go to this, and they were constantly working their agenda within that Novak segment.
In the remake,
those are probably the most scene-stealing stuff in the remake.
True. In the remake, when they have the one reporter, she's like a red asset, and then there's the child with a knife who gets gunned down. Oh no, we've just cut your feed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this movie was made in 2014 because the themes seem so timely in a post-Trump America with Fox News and everything else. if they had released this movie tomorrow, it's almost
huge.
as though they would have done it in response to the current state of the media and the current state of
I would have
politics.
guaranteed another $50 million on that movie.
Probably,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Probably. Can we talk about the cast in both of these movies, actually? Because both of them have huge casts.
Oh, huge. I didn't write down everybody, but I got all the primaries here. Peter Weller, Nancy Allen, Dan O'Hurley, Ronnie Cox, Kurtwood Smith, Miguel Ferrer, Robert DeQuia, Ray Wise.
A young Ray Wise.
Young Ray Wise. Felton Perry, Paul McCrane. That's just Robocop, the 1987 one. And Jesus Christ, 2014, they really did go all out. Joel Kinnaman, who's still an up-and-comer, but we're seeing him right now on Altered Carbon on Netflix. Gary Oldman, Oscar-winning Gary Oldman. Like, I don't know if he'll do Robocop after an Oscar, but, it's a good thing he hadn't won it yet.
See, he can do well without doing an impression.
Michael Keaton, who he seems to take long breaks from film, and this was kind of a return for him.
Yeah, and I like that he's
Now
coming back as a
Oscar
bad
winner.
guy.
Yeah.
He's been doing that a lot lately, and I like that. He
was a very likable bad guy.
He was.
Most of it, and
Yeah.
then before showing his real colors. So I like the way he played it.
He even was in the most recent Spider-Man movie, in Homecoming. He was still likable. Up until the end. Right?
When the first time we saw him as a bad guy was there was a movie where he was
Desperate Measures.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, with Andy
Yeah.
Garcia.
Yeah.
I love
and
that
that
one.
was the first time I was just like blown away.
Yeah,
totally
it was
good.
by far the high point of that film too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Abby Cornish, Jackie Earle Haley, who we covered in episode 112, Nightmare on Elm Street, so he's returning to the show. Michael Kenneth Williams, another one who's been in some great stuff, The Wire and 12 Years a Slave, and it just goes on and on. There's lots of people, and of course we mentioned Samuel L. Jackson for the Pat Novak segments, who's scene-stealing, but at the same time it almost feels like he's in a different movie sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think that was intentional, to be honest, because it does occasionally kind of pull you out of the movie, but not in a negative way. Like it's like part of the story.
He helps paint the canvas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that is that there seemed to be a bit of a pull with this movie as to what narrative they really wanted to go with.
Yeah.
And were they going with this kind of national security, globalization, we need to push this forward because we need to control and police the populace and concurrently see profits for our company.
Yeah.
Versus the story of Alex Murphy and what they're doing with him, which didn't necessarily advance those initial themes that they set out at the beginning of the movie.
And I think that's another reason that it kind of feels a little muddled, because you're right. You have two stories happening in the same movie that don't mesh very well.
Yeah, because Robocop was something that they pursued because the American people had rejected the ideation of drones and unmanned equipment policing in America. So,
yeah, there's this act called the Dreyfus Act that banned drones and robots from domestic law enforcement.
Yeah.
So then
Overseas, fine.
to circumvent the Dreyfus Act, so we put a policeman in this robotic body, and that will be the first step towards changing that worldview.
Yeah, it was definitely to manipulate an already divisive act. And it was... The movie was, and I think it did it well, but it's a really tough idea to get across on film, is the politics of something like this.
I think that's the difference between the two films. In the first film, it's that man having like control over his own actions, like the free will versus machine, and then the corporate stuff was the secondary story. But in the remake, the corporate stuff was the primary story, and the man overcoming the machine is a secondary story, and flipping that makes it seem uneven.
Yeah.
The human story is the bigger driver and should have been.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it seems like they give equal, if not more, time to the politics of it, and just manipulating Murphy to get those agendas happening. There was no real conflict between man and machine until they started shutting down the man, reducing his dopamine and all that, because it's all remotely done. He's not reacting as fast as the robots, and he makes moral decisions, so they were just shutting it down, giving him the illusion of free will.
But even
Which is a really great commentary, actually. I like that. I really liked that.
it's fantastic. But even then, it didn't make sense for the story that they were telling. Because it's like, well, we want to have him to circumvent the Dreyfus Act. So then why are they having him go against their own drones and having to meet the benchmarks of what the drones could meet? Because it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
because they
right.
need to get him out into the field.
Well, there was a reason for that, and it was strictly to show the antagonism between Robocop and Jackie Earle Haley's character.
Maddox.
That's the only reason that was there.
Yeah, there's this kind of weird racism going on where Maddox really preferred robots over cyborgs.
But if you strip
Yeah.
that out of the story that they were trying to tell with the Dreyfus Act, and then what is free will and versus the corporation versus the machine, you don't really need... Like, Maddox was awesome, and I loved...
Jackie Earle is great in this movie.
He was
He's great in everything he does.
Well,
I'm sorry, but he does.
And that's kind of what they did. They wound up taking the Dick Jones character and then creating more characters from it because they kind of had a Kurtwood Smith character with
Valen.
Yeah, with Valen. You know, they were the ones stealing weapons from the lockup in the remake, but they weren't giving them a lot of time. So they needed somebody who's just a nasty little human being, and that's Jackie Earle Haley to a T.
Yeah.
He's very good at that. And while you had a likable guy in Michael Keaton's Raymond Sellers, you don't see what a dirtbag is until later on. He always plays that villain very likable, and he's always trying to...
He's very charismatic. He's always a very charismatic villain.
He's doing that Steve Jobs, I don't mean anyone any harm unless, of course, it doesn't benefit
so,
me.
you don't... It doesn't feel like you have that big final conflict in a lot of ways like the original Robocop did. Big fight with that Ed 209 and the big face down with Dick Jones and... I don't know. The justice
even more
doesn't...
corrupt.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the difference is that with the remake, they had 5 or 6 really great concepts that they could have built their sequel around. And instead of narrowing that down to 2 or 3 that would really work well in conjunction with each other, it's like, these are all awesome ideas. Let's use them all. Let's use what is the human experience in a digital world. Let's use what is the automation of our world mean to us? What does the influence of corporations on politics, how does that affect us? And there's a few stronger stories and weaker stories there, but because they tried to do them all, I found that they were in a real sprint in that third act to wrap them all up, and then Raymond Sellers is there kind of as a bad guy holding a gun, where it's like...
Yeah, that all really happens in the last act with Raymond Sellers, where he turns out to be a dirtbag. Okay, he's coming after me because I'm the one who's made all this happen, and he takes the wife hostage. And it does feel like that sudden moment in the first movie where Dick Jones just takes the old man hostage and then fires him, so he's no longer part of it.
And the concept with the red asset, it should have been a longer game with that.
Yeah.
Because part of the point that they sort of gloss over is, okay, we run the police, but the whole point is we can't be held accountable by the police, and that was something they could have done something with, and they just sort of kind of ignored it till that very last act.
They could have made that. They could have brought that up when they were with the attack on Valen, even, right?
Absolutely.
Well, and that was the 4th directive, right, from the RoboCop original.
Yeah, but it worked better in the original RoboCop.
Yeah. The red assets thing, it was just a bracelet that you wore. Yeah. So you could be a criminal, but if you had the bracelet that didn't allow you to act against them.
They could have done more with that. Some CEO just buys it. Yeah. They could have had people. They could have had a meeting where they're selling it to multimillionaires.
Well, let's catch our audience up to what those prime directives are. Number 1.
Serve the public trust.
Number 2.
Protect the innocent.
Number 3.
Uphold the law.
Number 4.
It's classified.
It was. But classified...
Bob's Burgers, it's slightly different.
Okay, you do the Bob's Burgers before I get into classified.
It's uphold the law.
Yeah.
Serve the public. Dance like no one's watching.
Number 4.
We don't know, and it's not important.
It's classified. Okay. Classified being any attempt to arrest an officer of OCP results in shutdown, which is very similar to the red assets, which are just employees of OCP. Again, they just call it the red asset.
Well, not necessarily. So the red asset was a marker that was given to whoever
the
was
reporter.
Designated. Yeah, so...
Yeah. Anybody who needed to be protected in a combat zone, basically,
Right.
So you could be...
a random person.
And that was stuff that Maddox put in. And again, the 4th directive was also put in by Ronnie Cox's Dick Jones in the original movie
Dick Jones.
to protect himself and his employees.
Yeah, I think the difference between the two, though, is that Dick Jones was connected to Kirkwood Smith's Clarence Boddicker intimately. And then the main background narrative to all of RoboCop, which is another thing that the remake didn't quite establish, was the why for RoboCop. And I guess with the Dreyfus Act they did, but the why for RoboCop in the original was that OCP wanted to, with their takeover of the government of Detroit, wanted to establish Delta City. Delta City being crime-ridden, so they have to
bring in
my
RoboCop.
favorite term as somebody in law enforcement is the urban pacification, which is kind of a ridiculous term from a real-world perspective, which is why they developed something like Ed.209. And it was a bit of a flip, too, because in the new movie, all these things were out in the world and doing their thing.
Now, my question for you is, was RoboCop, by current law enforcement standards, following police procedures?
Well,
he really feels like a vigilante most of the time.
Well, yeah. There are some interesting things that would pop up here and there that just kind of made me chuckle. In the first one, where he rescues the woman from the two sex offenders,
shoots a dude in the balls.
Yeah. It's just like in his attempt to be caring, he assesses the situation.
You've suffered a traumatic event. We'll put you in contact
with the
with
rape crisis center.
Or in the second one, where he walks into the morning parade and says, "Yeah, you know what? I've identified my targets for the day. You should have EMS and arrest teams ready to kind of come and clean up behind me." Because, someone who's I've worked in the capacity of both Alex Murphys, as Patrol Alex Murphy and then Detective Alex Murphy kind of guy. And it was funny because one of the things is just like, who's going to come and clean all this up and do all this paperwork and
exactly.
Yeah, where does the paperwork come in?
Well, wait a minute. I would think he just hooks his head up to a printer.
Well, and that is one of the things.
He's probably got the easiest paperwork of all.
His memory is admissible as evidence, right?
Yeah.
Which is how Clarence messed up.
That's right.
Yeah, and I like the way they did that, right? And it's interesting how prophetic this movie actually is about a lot of things, right? I mean, about the use of cameras as evidence and video as evidence. And I'm not sure if anybody else noticed, but when Boddicker is at the scene where they kill Miguel Ferrer's character, he puts a DVD into a DVD player.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But that was cutting edge at the time.
It didn't even exist at the time.
1987.
But remember, 1987. It was a DVD, but then they had the other thing. Remember, after that, a lot of movies after that did mini discs. So now they look dated, but this one looks fine.
Yes, it does. Yeah, because they hit the nail on the head with that one.
This would even just been before Laserdisc.
It would have been right around the time of Laserdiscs. Yeah,
which were the size of LPs.
And in retrospect, that's actually a great way to play that taunt, because if you're going to blow up the guy's place, the DVD will burn to a cinder, whereas if you had, FaceTimed him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
cloud.
Yeah. But I saw that last night when I was watching it. I'm like, holy shit, I can't believe I've never noticed that before.
I noticed that too. I was like, oh my god, this doesn't look dated. It's great.
Yeah, there's lots of RoboCop carries the world's most aggressive USB stick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. And I love the fact that
it's really rude.
Yeah, it is really rude, and it doubles as a weapon, right?
Yeah.
So, it's pretty advanced when you really think about it. And like I said, it was very prophetic about a lot of things.
Yeah. And funny enough, the remake also had some prophetic elements to it. If you look at kind of where the social consciousness is right now, after the marches this weekend down in the States and stuff, versus
and the
when
fact
it was
he's
made.
Taking feeds from CCTV cameras. That's how he's tracking people.
Yeah. And when you really think about both these movies are set in Detroit, which literally is recently was falling apart, quite literally. People were leaving it in droves because it was the city was in receivership.
Abandoned,
which was the major theme in RoboCop 2.
Yes,
right? The city goes into bed with drug dealers because they're being manipulated by OCP, and it's like, well, turn a blind eye, and here's this truck full of money to pay your debt.
Yeah, it's ironic that they constructed a RoboCop statue in downtown Detroit.
They hint at it in the first one where he's in bed with Boddicker. He's like going, think about it. You could run this town with like drugs, prostitution, all this other stuff, and I have the RoboCop bit. And in the remake, like with the red asset stuff, that could totally play in. Like you've got the guy who's running the corporation, but he's in bed with the drug lord and everybody else.
Yeah, and that's what it goes back to what I was saying about the Valen character. Is if it would have been a lot more interesting if he had the red asset, it would have foreshadowed even more than that opening scene did.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and there was a great story there with Murphy and Lewis and that investigation, and then the police corruption, because it goes up to the chief, who they, in a 2-sentence bit, talk about it, the corruption, which should have been a central part of the entire story.
It gets thrown away in 10 minutes.
In it. Yeah. And it's like, oh, I'm confronting you, I'm forcing you to confess, like the lady with the bell in Game of Thrones, and then you get shut down. And that was a bit of a lost opportunity.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that ended up on a cutting room floor, because it already came in at just about 2 hours. And I think that there was. You're right. I think they had too many storylines, and they couldn't cut them out, so they just tied them off really quickly.
Yeah,
right.
Like I know it had a bit of a not trouble production, but that there was a lot of conflict between Padilla and the studio. Padilla and Joel Kinnaman were really advocating for it to be a restricted movie. The studio MGM was absolutely against that. And then there's the story about Padilla talking to one of his peers in the Brazilian filmmaking community saying, this is a terrible experience. For every 10 ideas I bring to the table, they throw away 9 of them. Yeah. So you kind of wonder how many of those would have been, had he been given the opportunity to realize those, what type of movie we would have
Well, that's just marketing dictating what they think the audience wants or where they think they can make the most money.
Yeah.
And in a post-Deadpool world where, hey, our movies actually can make money, John Wick, Deadpool, and we're going to see New Mutants next year. They're starting to do pop culture-y type of movies as R-rated movies, and they will make money. So if this had just been made a couple years later, holy shit,
absolutely,
we would have got that R-rated RoboCop.
Yeah. No, that's very true.
Yeah.
Very true. And I guess like one of the things that happened is the budget started to balloon, which then increased MGM's impetus to keep it PG-13 with their mindset that the only way we're going to recoup our losses is if kids see this movie.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, they didn't do a huge promotion on this one, not like they would for one of those tentpole movies. Like I remember knowing knowing that the sequel was coming or remake was coming, but then it just kind of appeared.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a case of, honestly, I don't even know what they were thinking, because this was a movie nobody wanted, which is why it didn't perform particularly well. It did okay, but everybody loves the original, and we've said this over and over and over again on our podcast. Why remake something everybody already loves? Because inevitably they're going to find fault with it.
Yeah, inevitably, it was a February-March type remake kind of thing.
I mean, now those are big months. I mean, just look what Black Panther did.
And Deadpool the year before. And so I mean, there's evidence that, the movie going public, and I think the studios are finally starting to realize is, yes, they have a demographic of under 18s, but right now, millennials and our generation still want to go to movies, and we don't want to see something that has been sugar-coated.
Well, and I don't think, I mean, trying to reintroduce to a younger audience, I mean, I see why they're doing it, but they want their own thing to grab onto, not their parents' thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why inevitably a lot of these big movies don't work, and they're accessible. All of those originals that we love so much are still accessible, and that's why when we do this show, when we try to remake something, we pick something really weird and odd a lot of the time, because those are the things, nobody knows what that shit is, and that's the perfect stuff to remake, because you can turn it into a franchise that it didn't happen the first time.
And the point is, if you've already nailed it, what can we do to make it better?
Well, and the biggest credit that I'll give to the folks that made the remake is that they didn't try and beat for beat remake this.
Oh no, I
they didn't do the commercials.
Really love the homage to. There has the homages to the original, but it's still a new story.
Yeah,
that sounds like a great cue for the trailer. We'll talk some more about RoboCop right after this.
What if I told you that even the worst neighborhood in America could be made completely safe? How do I know this? Because it's happening right now in every country in the world but this one. It is great to see American machines helping to promote peace abroad. So then tell me, why can't we use these machines here at home? Why is America so robophobic?
We need to give Americans a product they can love, a figure they can rally behind.
We can't put a machine on the street.
Forget machines. They want a product with a conscience. Something that knows what it feels like to be human. I'll give your mom a kiss.
Hi, baby.
Too slow, boy. We're going to put a man inside a machine.
Time to wake him up.
Make him more tactical. Let's go with black.
Quality control, EM208 versus Tin Man.
We are going to make a lot of money.
He's coming.
Gonna play good cop, bad cop?
Bad cop, Robocop.
He's undoing what we did to him. Thank you for your cooperation.
All right, Robocop 2014, and I guess my biggest beef with this, and maybe that's what turned off a lot of audiences, going from silver to black in this. I mean, part of that, the decision for the silver in the original is because they wanted him to feel like kind of like an old-fashioned knight.
Yeah, and it made sense. I think that they justified it really well in this movie into making him black for his launch, because it made him more intimidating.
Yeah. And it's from a marketing standpoint works, but I mean, from that trailer, if I were to see that trailer as somebody from the original generation who enjoyed the original film, I would have rolled my eyes and like, oh no, look at all the changes they're making.
Yeah.
But it would have been a turnoff for me, and I think it probably affected the box office quite a bit just because he didn't look quite right.
It's funny, like Sam said, like they integrated it into the story beautifully.
Yes, they did.
As to why they went that way. But being the RoboCop super fan, as you mentioned before,
and it does start and end with the classic colors.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember watching some of the online sentiment towards the movie. And it drove me bananas that before anyone had seen frame one of the film, it was, I hate this movie and I don't want it to be remade and I don't want to see it because they made the costume black and because it doesn't have an R rating, which I thought was really unfair because...
You got to give a movie a chance on its own merits.
Absolutely. And as a film, like, it is not at all a bad movie. Like, it's actually a very good movie.
Yeah, as you pointed out, there's lots of good elements, and there's lots in there to like, and lots of stuff that works.
It just, there's lots of really good stuff, but again, I think it could be, it's an okay movie to watch, but everything just gets cut off so quickly.
Absolutely.
It becomes irritating after a while, and that was the one thing that kind of... It wasn't anything else that got me mad about it. It was just those bits where it's like, oh, okay, so this big investigation into corruption in the police force, and then he confronts the chief, and then nothing. Okay.
Yeah. I enjoy the fact that there's a similar structure, but they play it very differently in the film. The robots were still in development as a possible police force where they've already been deployed as weapons for the military on foreign soil, so they're all active and perfected.
That makes sense, I think.
Yeah. And I like that. I mean, you did lose some of the more interesting elements from the original by doing it that way, like the scene in the boardroom where Ed malfunctions and kills a board member.
One of the board members.
Right? I mean, as a teenager and seeing that for the first time, I laughed my fucking ass off.
Well,
right?
the exchange afterwards is funny. It's like going, there's a problem with your product. Oh, no, it's a glitch.
It's this...
Somebody died.
There's this child war about who's going to get their toys made.
Yeah, it's exactly. And I mean, because the violence is so over the top, it's cartoonish, and it's not, so it doesn't offend you in the way that like a more realistic violence would, right? And that's why, like I said, we laughed our asses off because we saw it as comic the way I think it was intended.
It's absurd, so it's not.
Yeah, it's a parody
harsh.
on violence.
Yeah.
But what that scene really did is it put an exclamation point on the value of human life in the world of that movie.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Where it had none. This is somebody that these people conceivably worked with every day, that worked alongside them.
And
he
they should care about them. And when he dies, it's like, well, let's just clean up and...
Yeah, and the old man just shakes his head. Dick, I'm very disappointed.
And he's in there and like, it's not really my fault. It's just a glitch. We'll fix it. Like, he's not even thinking.
Yeah.
And at a later point, he's like, I don't care if they go out with the glitch. Like, he doesn't care.
It really does feel like this shit happens all the time. Honestly, I bet you that this movie was 100% a ripoff of like 2000 AD Judge Dredd comics.
Well, they talk about that Robocop was very much inspired by Judge Dredd.
You can even tell by the look, right? To a certain extent, right?
Where you just see the chin.
Yeah. Yeah, so the look does kind of inform it. You've got a really good point there.
Well, and I thought to a certain point as well, because he's downloading everything as it happens. Like, that's all the evidence he needs. If he was to be a judge, he'd be like, I saw you do the crime. What else do I need to know?
Yeah.
Well, and the remake, one of the things, from my perspective, that I loved is that he was... Like, I could kind of see him putting case files together.
Yeah.
And as you're watching the CCTV footage, then alongside the real-time footage that he's capturing from whatever cameras that he has going, and then using that in conjunction with the rap sheets or the warrants or everything else. And I thought that was
really well done. It was actually really interesting to watch, actually.
And especially when he starts breaking his programming, when he's basically just a robot, and he starts trying to solve his own murder.
Yeah.
And it does start out that way, where you're starting to see the casework, and he's uploading the memories, and it's starting to break the programming during all that as well, where the human aspect of Murphy is starting to come back.
And it's an interesting thought as well, because that's the whole point of kind of like the human brain's really funny that way. Like if you suffer from sort of a trauma, it'll start to reroute stuff because it can and it has to. So if you're trying to do this like with a human brain and trying to like program it, it might not work, because the human brain will be like, no, we're just going to go around and just...
Yeah, and that's one of the changes I really did like, was the way that they show how he starts out as being Alex Murphy in a robotic body, and they're slowly suppressing Alex Murphy. Right?
Yeah.
And I really like that, especially the fact that he actually got to interact with his wife and child after becoming Robocop.
And that could have been the whole movie. And that was another thing that I remember reading in advance of this movie as it was going through its development, was that Padilla's initial approach to the movie is, he said, in the original, Alex Murphy goes out, he takes that call, or they end up with the active robbery, he gets killed, then he's Robocop, and then from there it goes on, and he goes on patrol, and the story plays out. But he said between when he gets killed and when he goes on patrol for the first time, initially he intended on that being his movie. That period of time, from the time of his death to the time he's deployed, kind of thing. I wonder how much of that got...
Well, he got to spread that story over two characters. Like, in a lot of ways, RoboCop is a victim of the corruption, and we're also seeing that being paralleled by Gary Oldman's Dr. Norton. He starts out as a very moral man who's trying to help paraplegics, and he did not want his technology going to the military and having military applications, which is something OCP had been pushing him for a while. And they're like, hey, you can have all the funding you want, you don't have to struggle anymore, you can have all the funding you want if we can do this.
And they worked around it because it wasn't for military, it was for law enforcement, and that's how they sucked him in.
And we keep seeing him constantly sacrificing little bits of his morality to get the job done, and being pressured into it, and he's always at odds between his morals, and unfortunately he makes a lot of bad choices, which without those bad choices we wouldn't have had a movie.
And some of it, part of that is too because you have like Michael Keaton, he's very good at spinning what the idea is. Like, he knows how to get around what he has problems with.
Yeah,
But Norton knows
he knows he's being manipulated,
Yeah,
but I mean,
but-
Michael Keaton kind of knows
But now
which
he's
buttons to
invested
push.
in seeing this work at the sacrifice of his own integrity.
Yeah. Well, and Norton's ethical decision making as he goes through the movie was absolutely fascinating. And I thought one of the things that the film did really well was establishing a mutual respect and admiration between the post-Operation Murphy and Norton. And you kind of watch that initial scene, and I think the first time he manipulates his mind, Murphy's lying in the chair, and he's like, "Oh, my mouth tastes like peanut butter."
Yeah.
And, "Oh, you don't like peanut butter?" And it was just a really neat exchange.
Yeah.
But as an audience member, you know that these guys aren't friends. Norton's manipulating him so that he can outperform.
And you
the
just
drones.
don't get a lot of that in the original. So it's funny the aspects they choose to focus on, because Padilla recognizes there's a story there. So those scientists and engineers that built the original Robocop in 1987, you see them. It's just an experiment. It's just something they were hired to do for the most part. It's a project for them, and you generally don't see them much after that.
Well, and the interesting thing about the original is, and when you think about it, especially in comparison to this remake, is what purpose did using Alex Murphy for the Robocop actually serve in the grand scheme of things? Because all he was a robot. As far when their end product, the resurfacing of the real Alex Murphy was the story, obviously. But when it comes right down to nuts and bolts, he wasn't really necessary for what they were doing. Mm-hmm. They could have done a robot, and they did with the Ed drones, but they didn't. They didn't really need him in that sense.
With the initial, I think it was just supposed to. Their excuse for it was that it was the stability for the platform, the law enforcement platform, right? That the drones couldn't be trusted to perform the way they wanted them to, so this human interface was supposed to be the solution to that.
Yeah, and that's the thing that was the rationale. But yeah, because they made him so robotic, I think that was one of the few failings of the original movie, was they made him almost too robotic, and I guess that's what Padilla saw as well, and wanted to give him that human side, to make him more human initially, and then have him slowly turn into that automaton.
Yeah, that was his journey kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And it works so well. It was probably the thing that worked best for this in this movie for me, was that journey for him.
Yeah.
In the remake.
Yeah.
Because like he starts off fine, and then more robotic, but then eventually kind of reclaiming that humanity that has been lost.
Well, and with the remake, I think like the one thing that they really cut off at the knees that hurt them, I thought, was the relationship with the family, because they did an excellent job with developing that. And you had that beautiful scene where he goes and his son says, I've been saving all the Red Wings games on my iPad. Because I remember when he's sitting outside the house thinking like, this could come off really stupid or be something special. And then they play that out, and the kid talks about having saved all the Red Wings games, and they had seeded that really well that was the father-son relationship was really built on the hockey games amongst other things, and they showed this wonderful relationship with his family. And then, oh, well, how are they doing, buddy? And, well, I don't know, I've been saving them for you, right? And you have this person who's essentially dead, who's now having this conversation with his son, and that is also what Norton used, because Alex asks to be euthanized at one point in time, right?
Oh, yeah. He initially wakes up and has this freak out and goes outside, and they shut him down, and right after that scene, they show him what's left, and there's nothing left. It's his head, his lungs, and one hand.
Yeah. And he says, tell him it didn't work, and that's what Norton uses to convince him to live, was, here is your family, this is what you need to do. And then they built to it really well, to when they have like the data dump and they have to manipulate his mind again so that he can come do the press release. But then after that, they just kind of let it down, because I thought it was really interesting, and they had those powerful moments where he's greeted by Louis and Clara and the son. Yeah. And he kind of ignores them, and it's like, oh, this is going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. And then it kind of doesn't. Like, they just kind of sprint through it at the end.
Well, they at that point, what they do is the focus just sort of shifts to another part of the investigation, and they drop it for a while. Like, they just literally drop that storyline for a brief period.
Until like the last half of the third act again.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. And I really felt that she got shortchanged. Like, I thought Abby Cornish was really endearing in the role, and they had great chemistry between the two of them.
Oh, I love the scene when he comes home from work and like it's late and it's time for their kid to go to bed. You feel like there's some tension there between him and her. But then it kind of breaks, right? Yeah. She hands him the beer, right? And you get the feeling she's tense because she doesn't know what kind of day he had, right? And what he's going to tell her. And then she gives him the beer, and then all that tension breaks. Like you can actually feel the tension break because they had such great chemistry.
And here's a piece where I can give you something that's outside of the super fan territory, where like it's a high divorce type of occupation. Like 85% was the divorce rate when I started, and yeah. So, and for him to come home and there to be tension was very realistic, but it was amazing that for me, having a real world perspective on it, that she recognizes very quickly that he's stressed out because of what's happened to his partner, which anyone can relate to. And then she brings him the beer and they kind of have the moment, and then you see Kinnaman as Murphy process that, and he decides to kind of put the work stuff aside, and he needs to take care of the needs of
his family,
Clara and David, and he picks up his son to put him to bed, and they do the cute little kiss moment, and
and see, I was capturing that, like when he came home and he saw his son. I think like that was the whole thing. Like he was like he just wanted to be near his son, so she probably caught up to the fact like he's had a bad day, like with his partner and stuff. So because like he just wants to be close to his family,
and that's exactly what I felt from it. That was the point I was trying to make exactly. Like, but not being a cop or knowing that, like I just understand that from reading and seeing more realistic type television shows and documentaries. But yeah, that was I actually felt that was what the thing is. I actually felt it just by the lack of dialogue between her and him.
And that's a huge credit to the filmmakers, right? And it's stuff like that where it's just like, you could have almost told me this non-action story where it's like it's the story of this family.
And that could be the whole story. Like, I mean, it's like I say, that human element is what you can really grasp onto. Like once he's in the suit and that, but he kind of yearns. That's who he loves, and it's getting back to them.
I would have loved to have seen his struggle with being Alex Murphy in mind, but not in body.
Yeah.
Right? Because that could have been freaking fascinating.
Yeah, well, they kind of touch on that, right? When he comes and he's like, and he kneels down in front of his son, and he's like, "Oh, do you want to touch it, buddy?" And "Oh, Dad, are you going to stay here tonight?" And he can't, right?
He can't.
Exactly.
Really
and I would have loved to have seen more of that, where his struggle with the juxtaposition between being the man without the body.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I think that's kind of where that studio stuff came in. It's like, well, no, the audience wants to see him fight drones and stuff. Well, it's like, well, no, I was 8 when I saw this. I probably shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
But now that I'm an older person and in a maybe this is the movie that you should stand behind.
Yeah, like that action sequence where he's fighting the other electronic drones and Jackie Earle Haley's there. Like, I mean, that's to me a completely disposable scene. You can take him out.
Totally.
And you don't need it. You can have him be out on the street and fighting crime. Just a couple of crimes, 2 crimes. If
you're gonna test him, you put him through what a normal officer would go through, because that's what his job is. He's not going to be put in military situations. That's not what he's being developed for. So why are you doing him for military application robots? And why does he have to meet those standards? He should be exceeding a police officer's standards, not a robot's standards.
Like that scene was super cool. Like I loved just to show his locomotion and to. But yeah, you're right. It served the story they were telling no purpose.
No, it is a scene to be cool.
Well, if you take that in conjunction with the big action sequence at the end when he comes and fights the 2 Ed 209s.
But in the context of the story, it makes sense. He's trying to get in the building.
In the context of the story. But that was we need action set pieces. We want PG-13, so we can't have him taking down humans, but we want to show how proficient he is.
Yeah.
So we'll have him fight these drones. You're absolutely right. It doesn't serve any purpose. And then...
Well, they use it to tell the story of how they are suppressing his dopamine, where the program takes over and tricking him into thinking he's making those decisions. That's one of the great speeches, the illusion of
free will
speech.
How is he doing this?
His software is faster, his hardware is stronger. He's a better machine.
But you said humans hesitate.
Only when they're making decisions.
He's not making decisions?
Well, yes and no. In his everyday life,
Man rules over the machine. Alex makes his own decisions.
When he engages in battle, the visor comes down and the software takes over. And the machine does everything. Alex is, he's a passenger, just along for the ride.
But if the machine is in control, then how is Murphy accountable? Who's pulling the trigger?
When the machine fights, the system releases signals into Alex's brain, making him think he's doing what our computers are actually doing. I mean, Alex believes right now he is in control, but he's not. It's the illusion of free will.
Yeah, you're supposed to be watching something cool, but at the same time, they're giving you information of what they're doing. So there is an importance to the scene, but they do it more than once. And
it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. But it did set up that great line about what happens when you tase that little asshole in an exosuit.
Yeah.
It does set up that.
And then it comes back again.
Well, and like Maddox was just Alex, you'd got a relationship with him, and he was just such a callous jerk towards him, right? He's like, oh, you want a ticket home, or maybe you'll end up as recycling if you can't make it through my test, kind of thing. And
Maddox was a great antithesis to
well, for him,
Alex, but
for him, it's something that's going to be working in competition to his project, which are all the robots and drones.
Well, and to give another little policing bit, like when they do the virtual Alex versus the drones, Alex actually, from a policing perspective, performed that action and that rescue more properly or more appropriately than the drone did. So, outside of objective time measures, I don't know, Maddox.
See, that was a thing.
And that's
that was
I was watching that and thinking, isn't that what you want? You want that humanity.
Yeah.
Right? That's the whole point of this exercise, is you want that humanity. You don't want another fucking robot.
See,
that's what initially Michael Keaton says that they want. That's how they get around the Dreyfus
That
Act.
entire time I was watching that sequence, I was looking at it going, okay, so like they're just judging him on time and how fast he is compared to the drone. And at the end, I'm like going, wouldn't it be funny if one of the programmers just put something in where like the kid had a knife and the drone shoots him, but Alex doesn't? And I'm like, yeah, that's what we're doing it for.
Well, and that's what happened in Tehran.
Yeah,
right?
and that's what they should have done. Like they should have just had some rogue programmer going like just to fuck with Maddox, like just for it would have been a comedic beat, like a dark comedic beat, but it would have been there because it would have been a simulation. Yeah. It wouldn't have been a real kid.
Yeah.
But that was the point, and that's like, and the drone fight, like you said, this is the second time there's two of these pieces, and it felt like a retread.
And they could have a good 4 or 5 minutes screen time too. It wasn't a short scene.
No, not at all. One part of that too is because, like, the big falling down of this movie is there's no villain that carries the whole thing through. Like, your one villain, ironically, had the least amount of screen time, which was Maddox, and then...
Well, Maddox and Valen.
Or,
right?
sorry, Valen is who I meant to say. Because Maddox he's just kind of like the company
he's a henchman.
man. He's like the mechanic guy.
Well, he's supposed to be. I think he's supposed to put in for that character another executive who's got a competing project.
Yeah,
I think he's meant to fill that role.
Or like Clarence Boddicker.
Yeah.
Well, Boddicker was supposed to be Valen, but they did so little with him. Like all the villains seem to get just truncated, and nothing feels overly satisfying as far as hating anybody as a clear villain.
Yeah.
Well, and there's nothing like they had this personal tie to Alex and Valen. But they didn't give it enough time. So
you're right.
And Valen was walking into the lockup because of the police chief. Yeah. So you had to, the police corruption happening in that story. But she gets arrested, and you don't really get a sense of payoff off of that.
No, I mean, you get clues that there's police corruption involved right at the very beginning there.
Yeah.
But it doesn't carry through, and you get no clue that no clues that the chief is actually involved in it. You needed to see some of those little hints, right? That the chief was actually sort of the leak in the police force, right?
Yeah, like Sam Jackson's character, Novak used it to their advantage to sell the repeal of the Dreyfus Act, saying, well, we can't trust the police, so we need the drones and we need Omnicore's products.
And you know what they could have done too, which they sort of, like, it's a missed opportunity. Like, Dreyfus is probably Alex's biggest ally, like having his wife and kid kind of go to Dreyfus and be like, this is what's happening. Like, have Dreyfus maybe have a bigger role where he's the antagonist of the Michael Keaton character. That could have been something. And it just didn't.
Yeah, there's almost kind of two movies there, right? Like, where you maybe have the Murphy-centric movie as your first one, and if you do it well and people embrace it, then you have the corporation turn on him. But I think that was one of the things that they were too focused on tying it to the original.
Yeah.
Because you almost could have had a compelling story if Omnicorp was a positive entity in this, or at least
initially,
or you don't know what they are.
Yeah.
They're just doing this, and you think they're just doing it for the benefit of the city. And then once you've established your story,
and focused on the Valen story.
Yeah, absolutely.
They tell so much in this one that even if it had gotten a sequel, where do you go? Where it's just not. Now we just fall into boring procedural movie, where we've had those a bazillion times. Like, there was enough really clever elements that you could have literally split this up into a couple of movies.
Yeah. You could have expanded that world a lot.
Well, I was looking forward to seeing him in the silver body, and then I guess you play with what you should have probably focused on in this movie was how does this family come together with the massive barrier that is he's a cyborg now.
Yeah. I want to talk about Joel Kinnaman as
where does he keep his USB stick?
Yeah,
that's a good point.
I just wanted to say that I liked Joel Kinnaman in this role. I thought he did a great job stepping into a pretty iconic role. He brought his own elements to it. He did make Alex Murphy his own character, but he still paid the right homage to the character.
Absolutely. And he wasn't the first choice, was he?
That I don't know. No. I mean, rarely ever are, but I got to say, he's got the presence and the voice, and there's certain facial features as well. It all
his movement work is pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, it makes sense within the context of the suit. Like, he's restricted enough, but he's still kind of, there's freer movement than there is with the drones. Like, there's a difference between
like with Peter Weller, he wasn't the first choice.
It was Arnold. And there was somebody else.
Yeah, Michael Ironside they were looking at as well.
Really?
I can see where, but he's so stocky, right? And he wouldn't have fit in the suit. It would have just looked like a brick on him. But in the case of the remake, you just need somebody in one of those green bodysuits, and it's just CGI whatever onto them. But they needed a certain body type as well as a presence.
Yeah, but they did that practical this time too. So in the remake, it was
and again, if that's the case, they still need a certain body type, so he's not too bulky.
And Joel Kinnaman's a really lean man,
tall, athletic.
So Peter Weller and Joel Kinnaman both have that kind of runner's body, and they were saying that once Peter kind of came to the forefront as their front runner, they really embraced the fact that Robocop was not going to be massive. Because they didn't have to build the suit around somebody with a huge musculature. They had this slight runner's body that they could build the suit around and have him as just a bigger, more imposing human being, but he conceivably run into people that were just as big, if not bigger than him, kind of thing, which is a bit of a neat visual.
It's a cool visual, because the thing is, you think of a big, you think of Robocop, you think giant immediately in your head, but no, it's a cop-sized cop.
He's slightly taller than average, but he's not massive.
But you still get a sense of weight when he's walking. It's a little clunk, clunk, clunk when he's moving around. Because it's not musculature anymore. It's metal and gears and wires, and so you still get that sense in the sound design of that there's real weight to this dude.
Well, that was the one interesting.
He's a walking tank.
The remake never had that kind of refrigerator sound that Peter Weller's Robocop had.
They definitely made him more mobile. Like Peter Weller just kind of walks in a lot of ways like Frankenstein. He does have these kind of cool herky-jerky bird-like movements to him, but there's this more smooth mechanical feel to what they're doing. And that's just the advantage of modern robotics as well. So it's moving, and it's moving at a good speed at times.
And that was their intent with the new suit. Was they said we can't have it move and look and sound like Peter's Robocop, because robotics have come past that point. So whereas they were kind of jerky and very deliberate in the 80s.
I can see why Peter Weller just kept shooting all of his suspects, is because he couldn't chase after them.
Yeah, and I think that was the thing too. Is because the original Robocop was sort of this massive, indestructible presence. They hadn't identified what would damage him yet, but they make it very clear as soon as Alex wakes up in the remake. They explain, okay, you're armored, but you're not indestructible.
Yeah,
they make a point of saying that anything with 50 caliber over is going to hurt you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So they already established his weakness right at the beginning. Right. Whereas we don't get to find his weakness until the end of the movie with when Boddicker and his crew get these super weapons from Dick Jones.
Anti-tank weapons.
Yeah, the
Tank
Cobra
weapons.
assault cannons.
Yes, right. So it creates more tension because you don't know that RoboCop is vulnerable in the original, but you know he's vulnerable right from the get-go in the remake. Like they know how to beat him. Right. It doesn't work when Valen and his crew get the 50 caliber plus weapons. He still manages to take them all out, right? And I miss that aspect where he's vulnerable to these where he's almost taken out by these weapons, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, he's going tactical at that point. He's not thinking about the weapons at that point. Yeah, because those guys go down like that tiny alleyway. Like he could have taken them out pretty easily.
And that's part of the story too. Is you want to see your hero struggle a little bit before triumphing.
Yeah, in the remake, I think that's where the police chief gets implicated. Right, is that she's the one who tipped off Valen that he was coming, so that allowed them to set up for him and stuff. So
Although when you talk tactical, the one thing I really did like in the remake, where his partner comes in, they're like going, "Don't draw your guns, or they'll shoot at you." So he goes right in and goes in front of them, and the thing can't shoot and he knows that. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, he undermined the drones, used the programming against it, kind of thing.
Yeah, use their own vulnerabilities against them. Yeah, and there's a lot of that in the remake where they tell you what the vulnerabilities are and then use them, which is nice.
It's clever.
But yeah, I think that the fact that Alex in the original, I mean, he is immobilized and badly damaged, whereas in the remake he takes some damage, but ultimately it's being shut down by the police chief that takes him out of the game. And that was a little disappointing and felt a little bit flat.
Yeah, you don't get as much of a sense of peril in this.
No.
remake.
Well, and the thing with the original, when they have that scene, because he gets beaten up by Ed 209, ultimately defeats it with stairs. And then
That's so funny.
It takes out every robot. Daleks.
I thought for sure, when I thought of that, I thought Daleks. And then
you guys developed this huge drone and never thought about how to get it down the stairs.
And then it goes on its back and it does that squealing thing you see robots do.
And it has a tantrum.
And it's trying to kip itself up. Yeah. But then they have that great scene where the SWAT team actually shows up. And that was also a very interesting dynamic that they'd played with from my perspective, because you have the scene with the rescue of the mayor where the TAC team is set up, and there's a cockiness to Hitchcock, the TAC sergeant, as he's negotiating with the hostage taker, and then Murphy shows up and he's just like, just keep him talking, I don't need you to do anything. And you see this guy get emasculated, and then you flash forward to Dick Jones specifically calling him to show up at OCP, knowing that there's going to be a bit of a measuring contest between him and Murphy, and he's all too happy to deploy his TAC members to destroy Robocop. And then you see the patrol members actually come in and put themselves in harm's way for a minute, going like, Jesus, what are you doing? This guy's a cop. And knowing that they're woefully outgunned and that Hitchcock kind of will steamroll right over them. They're forced to leave Murphy to his own devices.
Yeah.
So
I was surprised more didn't come of that. Like that they didn't show up a little later once he got away. I mean,
yeah. Well,
I would have enjoyed that, but yeah, they sort of show up briefly, and I thought, oh, because I hadn't seen this in a while.
Well, it was kind of neat because there is a bit of separation between the different units and who does what, and the fact that the patrol guys came to his aid was endearing to me, and then Lewis is taking care of him, and she's a character that we haven't really talked about at all, or versus
I liked her.
The Michael K. Williams playing her in
Lewis, she's the first one to realize who it is, which I really liked.
Yeah, and that works really well in the original, and I think that by the way they changed the story, they didn't need that character anymore, which is unfortunate because one of the things that worked was the dynamic between Alex and his partners. Right? And it kind of, another thing that fades into the woodwork and sort of like pops up here and there is Alex's relationship between his partner in the remake. And there's a payoff at the end when he steps in front of the drone. Yeah. But it still doesn't feel organic because of the way the story was told.
I think essentially what they did was they took the wife and the partner and made that two characters, when it was kind of like essentially the wife and the partner was Lewis in the first one. The female lead.
Lewis is still the partner in the second one, but...
Yeah, but you're right. They did
the
it a few
emotional
times.
connection.
No, there's no emotional connection.
Yeah.
She's not trying to grab... And she was the brand new partner. It was in the first one, it didn't make a lot of sense that she would be the emotional connection.
Well, I kind of got the
just
impression
happened
that
to be there and getting shot, and I guess they share the trauma.
I had the impression she was a little bit of an outsider in that precinct.
Yeah. And you know, there was some really cool dynamics that parallel in the real world a little bit. Like when they first hook up, there's that feeling out process between the partners, and there is always that kind of who's the alpha and who's the omega.
Am I going to be able to work with this asshole?
Yeah, and so they set up, and he seems very encouraged to be working with her because she's very capable, and they have the scene where she takes out the suspect.
Yeah.
And then they get to the car, and she goes, "Well, I'll drive around until you know your way around." And he jumps into the seat, and "Oh, I always drive when I'm breaking in a new partner." And just her look, and I was like, "Oh, yeah."
And then later on, they get a call, and she jumps in and just takes over, and he gets okay.
Yeah, you drive. Yeah.
But then he asks her, "What do you want to do?" Like, they're totally.
And the key thing with that they actually played with in both movies, and in the second one, it kind of flips, but it's the responsibility to your partner.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And very subtly in the first one, the reason that she sticks next to Murphy as closely as she does after that is because you could almost draw an inference that she feels responsible for him getting killed, because she's the one who says, "We're not waiting for backup, and we're going to latch onto this and try and do this ourselves."
And she's taken out so early, so he's just kind of left in this kill box.
And like she kind of gets there, she's watching them shoot at him, and she can't get to him in time.
And she's the one that, you know, she plays a role in his recollection coming forward, but then she's the one that cares for him at the end. Like they don't know that they're going to be attacked, but she's bringing him the baby food and the drill so that he can take his
ironically,
mask off
it's that TV gun flip that clues her off that's Murphy inside all of that armor.
Yeah, and I mean, I always kind of got the impression that when Alex is taken out by Butterker's gang, that some time had passed, that didn't all happen in one day.
Oh no.
No, like, so they'd had time to develop a relationship. It just takes you kind of miss it. It's like one of those blink and you miss it moments that they suggest it without showing it to you. So I think they'd already worked out that they are partners and they worked well together as partners. And they're already friends.
Well, especially during that chase scene where they're in. I love that bit. They're in the back of the van and they're chasing behind, and the guys are getting rage, like just guns blazing outside the back. And they open it up. Car's not there because they've decided to pull around the side and do it that way because they're already on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. Like they connected really quickly. Right?
Well, that's what they did well in that first movie. Like with scenes like that, was establishing why you would conceivably need to use things like Ed.132 or develop a Robocop for your policing, whereas in the second one it's like, well, the city's kind of functioning and stuff, right? Whereas there it's just completely
it's a war zone. It is a freaking war zone. Yeah, Wild West. You're right. Yeah,
it's just missing a few trash can fires and it's dystopia.
Yeah, they always shop it around as like, well, let's not put any more people's lives at risk. These officers have given enough, and that's kind of what their reasoning is to develop something like Robocop and Ed.132.
Well, that and the fact that the police are threatening to go on strike, which they do which they do at the beginning of the second movie. Like, we're getting kind of off what the remakes and so on right now, but I like the way that the second one,
rather than the strike in the first one, that they just move into the Dreyfus Act for the second.
That's right, but it's
a similar story.
It is a very similar story, but I like the way that the story picks up right where RoboCop 1 left in the sequel. Is where they've now gone on strike. I like the continuity of that. And I would have liked to have seen a sequel to this one because I really did like Kinnaman's RoboCop, and I liked the changes they made to RoboCop. It's unfortunate the story they told didn't serve him very well.
Yeah, and you know what? Like I said before, like it's a far better than average movie. It just didn't get a chance because so many people had prejudged it. Like,
it was very much a victim of prejudgment.
I mean, and there's our chance to make a commentary on moviegoers today. Is instead of giving things a chance and seeing a movie, they judge it based on trailers or other people's feedback. Have your own opinions, people. It's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and
the more people were judging it, the more I wanted to see it. Everybody wants hate on this. Oh, it's got to be good.
And you know what? Here's the deal. Like, I mean, just go see it. I find the best feeling that you can ever have walking out of a movie is you're like, crap, I was completely wrong, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
It's a great feeling.
As long as you're wrong in the right way.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I was wrong in the great way.
Or you agree with the audience. They're like, nope, they were right, but at least I found out.
That they were right. I'm justified in my opinion now because I saw it.
But there's so many ridiculous criteria now, I find, for why people justify not going. Like, Lara Croft's chest size isn't the right size, or Murphy's suit is black, or like it's ridiculous.
And that's because it's a different fucking movie.
Yeah, you have great movies that are cut off at the knees, or that don't get a chance to tell the story they're going to tell.
Yeah. But there are some it's perfectly justified to like judge. I'm like, I'm not going to see an Emoji Movie. I'm not paying that money. I'm just not.
Yeah.
Angry Birds, no, not going to do it.
Well, we already know that Patrick Stewart, his emoji probably is the theme of that movie. Shit. It's just shit.
Yeah.
Sometimes shit should just be left
That's the thing.
alone.
Sometimes you can prejudge a movie, but just not on weird, like, obscure crap. Just don't do that.
It's a stupid cash grab that obviously didn't work.
Yeah.
And
the audience isn't that stupid. But then again, Sausage Party. That was one of those ones that I'm like, this isn't going to work, and it was hilarious.
This from somebody who doesn't like comedies.
There you go.
I like animated comedy.
Yeah, there we go.
But isn't that kind of like a nice thing? You're like going, everybody's hanging on, and then you see it and you like it. You're like, oh wow, that's kind of nice.
I don't dislike comedy. Jay Baruchel is in this movie, and
he's great in this movie.
He's actually pretty good for comic
just in marketing.
He's just marketing.
He does smarmy marketing guys so well.
He does.
He's one of those underrated actors. I've used him in casting before because I think that he's way more talented than people give him credit for. And I mean, he's a great writer-director. Has anybody seen Goon?
No.
Not yet. I do want to see it.
Yeah, that's the hockey movie.
That's the hockey movie. It's genius. It is so much fun to watch. I mean, it's not genius in a smart way, just genius in a fun comedy, hockey.
It's very
movie.
Canadian.
Yeah, very Canadian, yeah.
Which we appreciate.
We love it.
There you go. So, homework.
Yeah.
Watch Goon. There's even
go.
a sequel. If you, I haven't seen that yet. I might not. You never know.
Well, don't judge a movie until you've seen it, and don't judge our podcast until you've listened to it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do want to make your opinions known, you can leave a comment over in Facebook, Instagram. We are also on Twitter at Invasion Remake, invasiontheremake@gmail.com. You can also let your opinions be known by leaving a 5-star rating. Honestly, we only want to hear the good opinions.
Yeah, exactly. Let's put it this way: if you like us, tell all your friends, and if you don't, nobody likes a tattletale.
That's right. I mean, if it's treat it like you just robbed a bank, run like hell, and keep your mouth shut. Or we'll send Carlos after you.
Yeah.
But yeah, leave some positive comments, and if you didn't like it, at least let us know what you didn't like about the show, and maybe we can make those changes as well. And leave a quick rating as well. You can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, TuneIn Radio, Player FM, Spreaker, Audio Boom. I think we're going to be on iHeartRadio soon.
Nice.
And all your favorite podcast apps, all the best podcast providers, including
frickin' YouTube.
Yeah, those guys. And if you're listening to us on YouTube and you notice we're starting to drop on Thursdays, yeah, that's not by accident. All the guys using the apps, the podcast apps, are getting it first. So if you want to hear us on the go, on your way to work, whatever, throw us on your smartphone, use Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast provider you think is the best. Subscribe, and you get to hear us 2 days earlier than you do on YouTube. So,
That are alive, you are coming with me.
Not that we don't like YouTube listeners. It's just sometimes you have to make changes due to changes in other things.
That's right. So we're going to stagger some of the releases for some of this, and that's okay. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe there as well. Ding that bell to get the notifications when a new episode comes up. If you don't mind waiting a couple of days, then we'll be on YouTube as well.
I mean, sometimes Thursdays just might work better for you. So
right.
I like it!
Now we're going to take this opportunity to ask Carlos a few questions based on some past episodes.
Oh, yeah.
How about Assault on Precinct 13?
Yes. We were having questions about that. Because the Ethan Hawke character, he was originally a detective, right?
Yeah.
He was a detective and working cases. And then he goes back to like a desk job at the precinct. But like Brian Dennehy is kind of treating him as a superior officer. Is that like normal? Like, did he lose rank? We don't know what happened there.
How many people would be on board for shutting down a precinct?
Yeah.
And why would anybody want to steal from a precinct? Why would you still have a lot of stuff at a precinct that can be stolen on minimal personnel? Would that actually happen?
No, there's nothing to steal, so to speak. And then as far as the rank role goes, I haven't seen the movie in a very long time. But like a detective would be
still
a position of rank.
Oh, okay.
And I myself was promoted as a detective and then moved laterally to sergeant's role. So
okay.
Yeah, but would you get the shitty packing the boxes job as a detective?
No, and not as a sergeant either.
Okay, because he had like a trauma, and then he was put in like he wasn't out in the field anymore, so we don't know what happened there.
So if there's a trauma, there is
desk sergeant.
And there's accommodations based on health considerations. So. And mental health being one of them. So
you can get desk duty if you're undergoing psychological evaluation due to an incident kind of thing?
Yeah, or not even necessarily, just something to make sure that you're well, right? So they'll put you in a position where...
Packing boxes in,
relaxing, something a little more relaxed.
Maybe not some... But yeah, if you're like a TAC guy, they might put you in the skills and procedures unit to train people and stuff like that. That's... Yeah. I don't know that we have... box packing.
But I mean, how often do precincts get shut down? Either. I guess that it probably doesn't happen too terribly often.
Is shut down because of...
Well, maybe moved.
Or maybe moved to like a newer building.
To a newer building, yeah.
Yeah, like it does happen, but it's... Yeah.
Okay. What else do we got? I gotta look through the list now. It's 100 episodes.
I brought up the assault one because I remember that one.
Well, maybe that was all we had. That was the one
had.
that was in recent memory that I wanted to bring up because that was kind of funny.
Because we didn't know any of the answers to that. We're like,
we've actually done a lot of cop movies now that I think about it.
No, we have.
Well, if you ever want, we can.
Actually, favorite cop movies. Do you have any?
No, you know what? I'm not really.
Training Day versus Bright.
Oh, there you go.
I'm not really one to watch a ton of cop movies. Like I don't perpetuate this.
Would you have an orc as a partner?
Yeah, like that's actually a good question.
You know what? In the scenario, or in the world of that movie, yeah, I'd take on Jacoby or whatever his name is. I'd absolutely take him on. I think the representation of the community you're policing is
for sure
only a positive. So
yeah, I don't know. There could be lots of weird stuff you could ask. Like, okay, so if you apprehended a vampire.
I actually once asked Carlos privately because I had been watching.
Ooh, Wolf Cop.
I don't know that I've seen that one.
But... Well, I might have to show you that one.
Yeah, there's two of them now.
I don't have the second one yet.
Oh no!
But I do have the first one. Is it even out on DVD, Blu-ray?
I think it might be.
Oh, I'm gonna have to pick that up. Yeah, for sure. There was once where we were at the shop there, and I asked you. I just came off of watching things like Ghost Adventures, and I think there was a podcast I listened to where they were talking to a police officer about weird unexplained stuff.
Ooh, yes.
Like, somebody going, I think there's somebody in my house, and it's like doors are slamming all by itself. And do you ever get those weird calls where there is no explanation as to what the call was about?
Yeah, they usually result in a referral to an appropriate mental health resource.
See, they don't do that in movies enough.
No Mulder desk guy.
Yeah.
Well, like that Conjuring movie, they call the cops.
That shitty guy
get sent anywhere.
That one douchebag that believes in it in the department, and I'm like, nah, you can have this one.
Yeah. Yeah, is there a dude that gets those type of deals?
Yeah, no, we don't. We have a few guys that might have a parish priest on their speed dial that they could refer you to or something like that.
Yeah, you don't need a police officer. You need an exorcist, or a shrink. Well, that answers that question.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. We should have really thought of these questions beforehand, but I just had the Precinct 13 one ready to go.
That's all right. We don't have a lot of time here left, but thanks for joining us for Robocop, Carlos.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, you had a lot of great insights on this for us.
And a Robocop expert, so double trouble.
Easiest hosting job ever. I just kind of sat back and let you guys go around. I'm like, whoa, he's out nerding me.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to to come play when it's in my wheelhouse. So, yeah. Not that Alex Murphy was ever career goals. Or
that was a question. Is do you think that this movie, your love for this movie, kind of informed your career choice to a certain extent?
I don't know. Maybe ish, not directly.
Not like consciously. I want to be RoboCop. No, I get that, but obviously, it's something about it piqued your interest in law enforcement as well. I would think, anyhow.
Yeah, like the answer might sound cheesy, but I do have a sense of community service to me, and that was probably the driving motivation. And I don't know. I guess growing up watching that movie, RoboCop, and through the first two are the two that I watched ad nauseum. But that character does have a very strong. Well, that's one of his prime directives. The public trust, right?
Yeah.
And,
no, absolutely. Like I said, I know that 8 years old, maybe you did want to be RoboCop, but as you matured, I'm sure that somewhere along, I was wondering if somewhere along the line you feel that did inform your career choice.
Yeah. Well, and there's he's not always the shooting your gun off kind of character and stuff like that. But yeah,
I think for the most part, when at least people our age, especially growing up in the 80s, a lot of the role models, fictional ones anyway, were of a real high moral standard. I'm thinking about the comics I read, Spider-Man and Captain America. Punisher would come later in its popularity. So those really dark, kind of morally questionable characters were closer to the 90s. So there was always that high moral fiber of Superman and G.I. Joe. And there was a lot to build your moral structure on. And I don't know. I'm not saying anybody born after the 80s are shitheads, but we had a lot to inform that moral structure at that time. And
I mean, I think if anything, with the 90s, with that kind of moral gray area, I think the only thing it kind of was to show is that there's some redeemable. People, if you want to redeem yourself, there's the capability to do so. Whereas I think when it was the black and white era, you're either good or bad. That's what you stayed, and that seems kind of somewhat sad in a certain way. I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah, the 90s was kind of the first steps towards individual human experiences, right? And then, which doesn't always fit in a black and white type environment.
And I think it was a direct response to the bright and shininess of the 80s, because there was a lot of bright and shiny in the 80s.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Watching the disco scene in RoboCop, wow.
They were having a good time.
Wow.
Which incidentally featured Paul Verhoeven.
Where?
He's the guy at...
Does he catch the gun?
No. No, so right after that, there's a guy who's right in your face in the camera, just kind of shaking it like there's no tomorrow. That's him.
Oh, man.
I did hilarious. Not catch that. That's funny.
The comedic peaks where he knocks the gun out of his hand and this guy's just grooving. He just keeps grooving.
Yeah, he just keeps dancing.
All right. Well, next week, I guess Sam's going to be in charge.
Well,
maybe.
I'm going to step into the role. I won, fair and square.
You did.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I think there was a fix there somewhere.
Oh, not on my part.
I don't know.
Don't be mad. I did my research.
Okay, we'll give you a shot.
I watched my movies and...
I watched the movies. You know what? I gotta watch.
Tyler didn't watch the movies.
See, and when I watched less movies, I did better. So maybe I have to go back to that.
Yeah, you went with your feelings a lot this time.
I did. Feelings are bad.
I haven't even.
That's what I did last year, and I finished dead last.
She
right?
still doesn't know what her score is.
I don't want to know what my score is. But now next year it's full RoboCop. I'm not going with any feelings at all. It's all dead cold analysis.
That was a great episode because I knew as long as I didn't come in with just Guillermo del Toro for every question or point that was put forward, I was like, at least I won't be the bottom rung guy. and your comment section was like, never bring that pig back on our show.
Be nice to our law enforcement specialist.
Yes, be nice. Be very nice.
Because, if you have a Facebook with your real name and you suddenly get a lot of traffic tickets.
We just want to know.
Oh, no.
All right, well, that's been RoboCop. I've been Jason.
I'm always Sam.
I continue to be Trish.
Stay out of trouble. I'm Carlos. Thanks for having me.
We are out of here.
Bye.
There's still no word from Omnicorp parent company, OCP. And although the government says they are rebuilding Alex Murphy, rumors continue to swirl about his condition. But we have obtained exclusive video taken by cell phone that shows the people of Detroit may have Alex Murphy back on the streets sooner than they think. The real tragedy here is that our president chose to uphold the Dreyfus Act. Now, I have no doubt he was manipulated by a biased media and by whistleblower Bennett Norton.
I acknowledge we know less than we thought, but I do believe my research program is sound. What I did with it was wrong.
The fact that this mother is not serving time in some federal penitentiary is a huge, hot, heaping pile of horse. Now, I know some of you may think that this kind of thinking is dangerous and these machines violate your civil liberties. Some of you even believe that the use of these drones overseas makes us the same kind of bullying imperialists that our forefathers were trying to escape. To you, I say, stop whining. America is now and always will be the greatest country on the face of the earth. I'm Pat Novak.